in 1996, when I wrote Reign Without Thunder, I introduced this idea of new welfarism, that the difference between the old welfarists and the new welfarists was that the new welfarists believed that welfare regulation would and should get to the abolition of exploitation in the long term. There is no empirical reason to believe that the regulation of animal exploitation will ever lead to its abolition. There's no historical evidence for that. If anything, there is quite a bit of historical evidence that the more regulation we have, the more animal exploitation we have, because people end up feeling better about exploitation the more you regulate it, because they think it's okay, it's humane, it's acceptable, it's morally acceptable. Many of the practices that these welfarists attack are practices that are already economically vulnerable. For example, the gestation crate with pigs, with sows. Animal agriculture studies show that if you use an electronic sow feeding system as an alternative to these gestation crates, you increase sow productivity. You cut down on mortality. You cut down on disease. So a lot of these campaigns that are the target of animal welfare people, animal welfare groups like PETA, HSUS, etc., just about all of them, are practices that are economically vulnerable. Now, one might ask legitimately, well, wait a minute, if they're economically not viable, why doesn't industry shift without being told by the animal people to shift? Because if they're rational actors, wouldn't they do what was economically efficient? And the answer is, it's more complicated than that. When factory farming was developing, the people who were designing this, they weren't factoring in that we're not dealing with widgets, we're dealing with sentient beings that get stressed and get ill as a result of that stress. So people weren't really thinking about, they were thinking about concentration, concentrating commodities and increasing profits. They weren't thinking about, and they weren't factoring in what the costs were going to be of that intense concentration. And what's coming out now is, is indications that certain aspects of factory farming are very economically inefficient. But it takes time for that information to get out, for that information to become internalized within the industry, and for capital costs to be incurred to change those practices. Industries like the meat industry or biomedical research, for that matter, will resist any sort of regulation, even if they don't think it's particularly harmful, because they always need to impose opportunity costs on opponents or adversaries, because they want to make sure that everybody understands, if you come after us, if you want us to change something, we're gonna exact our pound of flesh from you. I remember having a conversation with some vivisectors at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was then teaching, and I said, why are you guys opposing the 1985 amendments to the Animal Welfare Act? They're not going to hurt you. If anything, they're going to help you. And they said, yeah, we know it's going to, but we've got to oppose it, because if we don't oppose it, if we're not seen to oppose it, then you might come after us on something we really don't like. What's happened is that the animal movement has become, there's this bizarre partnership between animal industries and animal organizations, where animal organizations are going after these after industries for largely, minor changes. They go through this dance, they yell and scream at each other, and then there's some accommodation, which doesn't require that industry do very much. The animal people then declare victory and send around 80,000 million pieces of direct mail and ask, tell people, you can help change the world, just write us your check. And they make lots of money. I was just looking at some of the emails I got today, and the consistent theme in so many of these things that I'm reading is various animal welfare reforms are being disregarded. I mean, whether it's there's now a move to start horse slaughter again. I have all these activists in Britain who advocated against the use of dogs and fox hunting and stuff. The bans being disregarded. I mean, it's like all these welfare things. None of them ever really works, because we haven't changed the way people think. And as long as we don't change the way people think, it's never, you're never going to see any sustained change. But that paradigm shift has got to center on and focus on what people eat. As long as 99% of us think it's all right to eat animal products, with the best justification we have for inflicting pain, suffering, and death on 56 billion animals every year, not including aquatic animals, is that they taste good. Well, as long as you've got most of us thinking that, nothing's ever going to change. I was saying in the 1980s, What we ought to be doing is coming up with creative, nonviolent ways of educating people about veganism so that we can shift the paradigm away from the property status of animals, because that was also clear to me as a lawyer, as a law professor. It was clear to me that animals are economic commodities as long as we have this relationship of property to property owners. As long as animals were economic commodities, every time you try to protect animal interests, you were paying money. What that's going to do is it's going to severely limit the sort of protection that we accord animals. And that's why animal welfare doesn't work, because it basically, we can't afford to protect animal interests, particularly in the world that we live in now, with the fact that we have all of these trade barriers down, we have this, quote, free trade situation. It's never going to work. If we really want to change the world, we've got to focus on veganism.